Ask an average John Wayne fan to name the star's hit aviation film, and chances are he'll say The High and the Mighty. Some might recall The Flying Tigers, made during World War II, or even Flying Leathernecks from 1951. But the movie that slipped through the cracks is Island in the Sky.
Hold your hats!
This picture is drama at its best, pitting man against the brutality of nature in the frozen wastes of Labrador after the crash landing of a World War II transport plane. Released in 1953, it was a critical and financial success, but ultimately was overshadowed by the bigger, better promoted film The High and the Mighty, released the very next year. Over the decades, Island in the Sky has languished in the vaults, virtually forgotten, an invisible film. It's a shame such a good movie has fallen off the radar, so to speak, but that makes its return on DVD all the more welcome. Here is a story of civilian pilots buffeted by icy, howling winds with little food, no place to hide, no place to warm their frozen bodies. Will they get out alive? Meanwhile, the searchers, their fellow pilots and crewmen, fight a grim race against time and the elements. Actually, the film is based on a real-life incident that took place during World War II, when the screenwriter and adventurer Ernest K. Gann flew as a civilian pilot in the Air Transport Command that's featured in this film. Gann turned the story into a novel and then adapted it for the screen, joining a superb creative team led by director William Wellman, with John Wayne producing and starring, the same team that later put The High and the Mighty on the screen. A sterling cast was chosen for this tense, no-frills film, featuring some of Wellman's and Wayne's favorite actors, including such veterans as Andy Devine, Walter Abel, Lloyd Nolan, Wally Cassell, and Alan Jocelyn. Wayne's old friend Paul Fix, and his son-in-law, Harry Carey Jr., flying along with one of the great stars of early Western films, Bob Steele. Such relative newcomers as Sean McClory and James Arness, and a few future stars like Fess Parker and Mike Connors. Don't blink or you'll miss them. 3 former juvenile actors have prominent parts as well. Jimmy Lydon as Wayne's navigator, Carl Alfalfa Schweitzer as Nolan's co-pilot, and Darrell Hickman as another crew member. Amazingly, the shooting was completed ahead of schedule, a feat that was heralded in the trade journals of the time. What's even more remarkable is that the 90-man crew spent almost 2 weeks shooting in the cold of the Sierra Mountains as they recreated the extremely harsh subarctic conditions faced by the hapless crew of the downed airplane. If you survive the tension of the story, then settle in for a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the film, as cast and crew members share their vivid recollections. Segments on the history of early aviation and the role of the transport carriers during World War II serve up little-known information, with terrific photos and newsreel footage. And don't miss the special profile on writer Ernest K. Gann, whose passion for the skies was the driving force in his life, a passion that found its way into novels, screenplays, and people's memories. Perhaps the biggest difference between this film, made in 1953, and movies of today has nothing to do with technology. This is a film utterly devoid of irony and cynicism. It celebrates comradeship and loyalty, qualities that, in this case, make heroes out of ordinary men. So bundle up and get ready for the knuckle-biting adventure of Island in the Sky. You'll find yourself on the frozen earth in the middle of nowhere, desperately trying to survive. You'll feel the tension and the frustration of the weary search crews, and you'll feel what every good movie should make you feel, part of the story. Lost in the vault for decades, Island in the Sky is a solid piece of entertainment, but also a slice of Americana and a reminder of Hollywood movie making at its best.
Hollywood turns out for the sparkling premiere of Warner Brothers' new film, Island in the Sky. Producer Bob Fellows, director William Wellman, and star John Wayne are here to greet premiere crowds, including famous aviators. The movie honors the Air Transport Command, and among the premiere goers are Bob Cummings, Red Skelton, and Mrs. Skelton. Thousands of Hollywood folk, including Mr. and Mrs. Gordon McRae, are seeing Island in the Sky, a tribute to aviation's 50th year. Now John Wayne presents to business leaders a time capsule containing aviation records, which is accepted by the Los Angeles Junior Chamber of Commerce. A bright premiere for Island in the Sky.
What a time to be making movies. Just think of the challenges that faced cinematographer William Clothier to create those riveting aerial sequences. Famed aerial DP David Noel and others who worked alongside Clothier tell us how he pulled it off and provide some inside information on Clothier's long and heralded career.
This is a story about professional pilots and their special guarded world, their island in the sky.
Y tus trailers, visita mi canal.
The Fraternity of Aviators is celebrated at the Planes of Fame Museum in Chino, California, where aerial cinematographer David Noel came to discuss the work of legendary director of photography William Clothier. Noel, whose aerial work includes Pearl Harbor, Minority Report, and Jurassic Park, was impressed by Clothier's work in Island in the Sky.
So I'm sure he had pretty exciting times working on a picture that had this much aerial photography, which really had not been done that much before. I look at it technically because I go, how did he do this? He's 1952, what aircraft is he working out of? Imagine the cameras that he was using at the time. And when I saw the film, I was wondering if maybe he had used a bomber, because doing the picture in 1952, these kind of aircraft were, a lot of them were available back then. But apparently he used this Cessna that they took the door off so he could actually put a camera right there and shoot out the side.
The planes have changed, but the considerations of aerial photography have remained the same for 75 years.
It's a daytime shoot all the time, so how do we make this look beautiful or dangerous or whatever the sequence happens to be? And then the story will drive some of that too. Is it something that's going to be shot against a cloud background? Will it be against mountains or the ocean? And then you're at the mercy of Mother Nature a lot of times as to, you know, what you can and can't do. A cloudy day isn't going to work if it's supposed to be clear and bright and sunny, or just the opposite. If they want clouds and there are no clouds that day, you're kind of stuck. The night shots, it's the same thing I have done to make it look like it was nighttime. With his black and white photography, he was able to add some filters that are like red filters to make the sky look darker, and he actually shot it and underexposed it and shot it at angles where it was heavily backlit and things like that, and you get the sense that it's nighttime. With his fixed wing, that he's forced to fly at a certain speed, but like what they did with wings, where you had a cameraman in a cockpit and a camera mounted to some sort of modified gun turret, and he was shooting out the back, pilot sitting in front of him, and he could shoot the other aircraft or shoot through his own tail. Well, I ended up having to do the exact same thing for Pearl Harbor. So here we've gone from 1926 to Pearl Harbor. We're doing in 2000 almost exactly the same. Your rolling camera, your radio to them, the camera's rolling. Give me a couple of seconds, all right, on our command, you know, hard brake to the left, and boom, off they go. So anytime that the pilot has a chance to fly the airplane with a little more performance, they always love doing that.
Spread out!
Whenever it showed the aircraft, and sometimes up to 3 of them in close formation, then that's, you know, when it really brings that across, that these guys work together well, and everything is all thought out with safety in mind long before we leave the ground. But is it a dangerous side of this work? Yes, there's no doubt about it. Any little type of thing can go wrong.
During the filming of Island in the Sky, Clothier had a close call when writer and pilot Ernest K. Gann was at the helm of the camera ship.
The writer of the script also was a pilot. So he was flying this aircraft, and Bill's shooting out the door, and they were flying in formation with this DC-3, and then they wanted to go inside this cloud. You know, just any time that you go formation into the cloud, you can do it as long as you have visual sight of that other aircraft all the time. And then apparently Clothier can't even see him in the viewfinder, so he takes his eye away from the viewfinder and doesn't even see the aircraft outside the door anymore, and then he looks and the aircraft is under them. It looked like they were probably about 4 feet away because he could see he could read the rivets on the wing and stuff. And of course he yells to the pilot, you know, get us up out of here, because that's the best thing to do. Just go up at that point and then hope that you're not going to hit anything. So that was the thing, is he said, you know, we're never doing that again. He says, if you want to do that again, I'll stay on the ground and you can shoot it.
God Almighty.
I have read about Mr. Clothier. Interesting background. He apparently was born in 1903. And I think he was around 23 years old when he worked on Wings. And then kind of following his career as it went through his work at Paramount, and then he went to RKO, worked on King Kong a little bit, things like that. The war came along and he was in the photographic service. And then once you got into the early 50s after the war, well, first they did Jet Pilot, which was done in 1951. Then he did Island in the Sky, and then The High and the Mighty. So he did 3 real significant pictures there that were standouts as far as their aerial photography at the time. went on to do a lot of the John Ford movies that were famous for being shot in Monument Valley. Clothier in his work on these different pictures worked with John Wayne, and I believe he did 15 films that John Wayne was either in or John Wayne's company, Batjack, produced. So that's quite a track record to be doing 15 John Wayne movies. So he had quite a storied career. You have to look at it as a period piece, the period that it was taken in. Enjoy the black and white photography of it. I mean, it was a real standout. It's stunning work.
Island in the Sky is a superbly well-crafted film that demanded the best its actors and crew had to offer. Now let's go behind the scenes and learn the interesting story about the making of this film.
Have you heard about Dooley?
Dooley's down.
Dooley is down.
That leaves us 10,000 square miles to search.
Somewhere over them mountains, Dooley's waiting for us.
Now all we gotta do is find him.
Everybody was excited about this film, and a lot of it was because of my father and because of John Wayne. They were excited. At that time, my father had an agent, Lester Linsk was his name, and he brought this story of Island in the Sky, written by Ernest K. Gann, this book, to my father. My father loved it. He took it to Wayne, and Wayne was all excited about it, and in 1953 they made Island in the Sky.
Hollywood turns out for the sparkling premiere of Warner Brothers' new film, Island in the Sky. Producer Bob Fellows, director William Wellman, and star John Wayne are here to greet premiere crowds.
John Wayne formed his company, which was called Wayne Fellows, in 1952, and he was one of the stars that started that breaking away from the studios and forming their own company and making their own films. And Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, there were a number of them who did it, and Wayne was kind of, the vanguard of that.
When Wayne Fellows was in existence, they made some good pictures. They made Hondo, Track of the Cat, and they made The High and the Mighty, and they made Island in the Sky, and they made Big Jim McLean, starring John Wayne and Nancy Olson. The last one they made together was Blood Alley, 1954. Wayne Fellows broke up, and the company became Batjack. Michael Wayne, Duke's oldest son, sort of became the president of the company.
It's very interesting about John Wayne. He was the boss because it was his company, but he was the most democratic of people. I remember being out on location, and I remember John Wayne helping them carry cameras places. It was a great experience just meeting the man and being around him for a couple of weeks and seeing how he handled his company, his film, his crew, his actors, and he treated everybody the same way.
There was a quality about him that seemed to endear him to everybody, to audiences of all ages.
From about the age 38 or 40 on is when he really began to get that look about him that was so cherished and so worshipped by people. As a producer, he'd come on the set when he wasn't working and watch the other actors work. As sometimes it made the guys nervous, but they got over it,
Get going on that coffee grinder!
I watched him shoot some of what he did, and I had the feeling that this was one of the chances that he had to combine his action hero self with his acting self.
I think he was underrated as an actor. He was a powerful actor.
Willie! McMillan! Don't say!
I guess we're awful hard to see down here.
Ernest Gann wrote the book and the screenplay, and he was on the set as a technical advisor.
Ernest K. Gann, being a former airline pilot, he knew about airplanes. He was a pilot himself. He owned his own airplane, and also many of his novels, I think at least 6 or 7 were made into movies.
Ernie Gann had said that he had based this on a real happening, a real life happening. They shot this in Donner Lake near Truckee, California.
Bill and I looked all over everywhere for snow, and we found it in Truckee.
And they were DC-3s that are in Island in the Sky. In fact, they had trouble finding these planes. They finally found them in somewhere in Kansas, 6 or 8 DC-3s.
We had DC-3s flying everywhere. I couldn't believe it. I mean, you catch your breath once in a while watching them because they were tipping their wings. And at one point, I just didn't know how they were flying them. They're like they were flying kites. And you know, they're kind of big airplanes.
There were two photographers, two cinematographers on Island in the Sky. There was Bill Clothier and there was Archie Stout. Bill Clothier, who was one of 17 cameramen on my father's film Wings. He was always hired for anything that had to do with aerial work. And then Archie Stout came in and he did the dramatic stuff, because they did all the aerial stuff first, and then they did the dramatic scenes afterwards.
When we moved back to the stage, then we had to simulate snow, like the fellow that walks around in circles and then finally freezes to death and he's just a little way from camp.
Over there!
I mean, we really had an ensemble cast. And Andy Devine was along, one of Wellman's favorites.
My father liked having members of his family involved in the films.
I guess they just needed a couple of kids who would be the children of Andy Devine. I grew up with the Waynes and the Devines as being friends of my folks, so John Wayne was like somebody I saw all the time, and hanging out there was really great. But I was afraid to dive in the water next to Andy Devine. You know, I thought I'd drowned or something. What my dad did is had me jump in the water first and swim a little bit before Andy and my brother Tim dove into the pool.
There were certain actors that my father did use fairly often. George Chandler, who worked in every single movie my father made after A Star is Born. Over 30 movies.
Bill was in his revelry. He had all his favorite young actors in playing the different parts. Sean McClory, an old friend of mine that was on The Quiet Man with us. He had James Arness in there playing a pilot who was Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke.
The Duke did a plug for Gunsmoke when it first, before it came on. He said there's going to be a new show on CBS and so on.
When I first heard about the show Gunsmoke, I knew there was only one man to play in it, James Arness. He's a young fella and maybe new to some of you, but I've worked with him and I predict he'll be a big star.
I wonder if Jim ever figured he'd be on that for 20 years. That was the longest running show in history, I guess, of television history anyway.
Maybe I'm drinking the wrong kind of liquor, but them mountains ain't on my chart.
Wellman loved doing Island in the Sky because it was directing pilots and he loved it. He loved airplanes and he loved the story and he loved the idea of all the pilots.
Well, Bill Wellman was the best. He celebrated everything he did every step of the way, and he invited you to the party. That's the kind of man he was.
He made you proud of yourself. You know, it was like you did him a big favor when you finished a scene.
Geez, that was a hell of a shot, and you know, he just, you know, he would go on like that. And then you got John Wayne doing the same thing. And it wasn't that they were being superficial about this. They felt it. And it was a very successful film and one of my father's favorite films.
Dooley! Your wife and kids are waiting for you!
Hey, Dooley, I didn't know you had a wife and kids.
Yeah. 6 of them.
He was a pilot, a novelist, a screenwriter whose experiences were the stuff of legend. Ernest K. Gann was an adventurer who believed the saying, a writer should write about what he knows best. Well, Gann knew flying, and John Wayne knew Gann's talent could be translated to the screen. It was a pairing that would make cinematic history. Learn more now through this profile on Ernest K. Gann's life.
Ernest Gann believed in the exactness of machines and the arbitrariness of fate. He was an adventurer who pressed his luck to the limit. Born in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1910, his career as an aviator spanned his roughneck adolescence of barnstorming, the lean and mean years of World War II in the Army Air Corps Air Transport Command, and progressed to the sleek commercial airliners such as the DC-4 and the Stratocruiser. Not content with life in the air alone, he tried his fortune on the sea in boats and ships of every description and set himself against the waves and wind of both the North and South Pacific.
Quitus trailers.
On the ground, he
Visita mi
lived the life of a
canal.
rancher, taking the weather as he found it, good or bad. Weather was a constant companion and a constant challenge on land, sea, and in the air. Ernest Gand lived every minute of his life as an adventurer, author, and artist. He made every minute count and recounted his life in books, films, and paintings.
During the time that Ernie was writing for the movies, starting in early 1950s, he would be ranked right along with the authors of today, such as John Grisham and Michael Crichton. You know, people say, golly, John Grisham, he's had 4 or 5 books of his made into movies. Michael Crichton's had at least the same. And they're probably the hottest authors going. But wait a minute. Do you realize that Ernie, right up into the 1980s, had 9 of his novels made into movies? And that's a big record. And it's going to be hard for anybody of that stature of author to ever equal. I mean, 9 of his novels made into movies is almost unheard of.
Ernie got all of his ideas from his own experiences. And he always wrote about the people he knew and the people or the events he was involved in. If there was a rescue mission he had to go on, you know, as a pilot, he wrote about that. So he really got to know the subject, what he was writing about. And the same thing with boats, or same thing with other type of adventures. And that's what the difference between his stories and some of the writers today. Ernie always had a very deep knowledge of the people he was writing about. And whether it's boats or planes or dramatic events, he always researched it very thoroughly, he experienced it, and he wrote about it. That's basically what his whole approach was to writing. When we talk about what makes a good story, you know, he always had these different points. He said, if you want to make a good story, you got to have it in an exotic location. You got to have interesting characters. You got to have a protagonist, you know, somebody, you know, you identify with. Make sure you have a beginning and an end. You're going to have the toughest time with the first shot. What's going to be your first shot in your story? And you're going to have the toughest time, what's going to be your ending? And if you figure those 2 things out, the middle is nothing. Because then you already know who your characters are, and you know what the ending is going to be. He loved when the story held together, when the people were interesting, and those are the kind of stories he could write. When he did Sweet 16, well, he was 16 years old in 1926. I mean, if you go back, what films were made in 1926 by a 16-year-old kid? Having to borrow his mother's car and the kind of technique he used when they were driving, the kids were rocking the car to make it look like it's moving. And then the long shots are the only ones which actually the mother or the father drove. But everything else he did. He had this love affair with this beautiful girl with the, you know, dark hair, and he says, I knew I had to cast her into it, and I had to write a story about her. You know, the one who goes to the city, and when she comes back, she acts like a sophisticated lady, you know, and no longer wants to talk to him because he's a country bumpkin, he just stayed home, you know. See, that's how he gets his ideas. It's all from real life. And it became a financially successful picture. He spent $200 on it, and the first month he grossed $400 on it. So he paid everybody back, and it's an incredible film when you look at it. His father wanted him to be a phone company executive, you know, just like he was, and he tried to get him in there, and he was almost like forcing him to do something respectable, and instead of being an actor, or instead of, which he was, you know, like he went to New York and he became an assistant director, and then he tried the stage, and he went to Yale also. He spent 2 years at the Yale Drama School. He was telling me the stories about, you know, how he felt when he first got introduced to literary things, although he was in the military academy, but he didn't care that much about it. But he had a very good drama teacher over there at the academy who inspired him and told him that you are a good, you know, you can be a good writer if you have the discipline and you want to do it, you're going to be okay. And he did, and that's how he got started with the writing, way back, you know, when he was very young. He took a flying lesson when he was like 16 or 17 years old. When he was a commercial pilot, you always spend a lot of times in hotel rooms waiting to return with a flight and so on. Ernie decided to write during that period of time.
I knew him for 38 years, from 1953 till the day he died in 1991. Somebody that I'll never, ever forget. He and I roomed together when we made Island in the Sky, directed by William A. Wellman. I was the first assistant director. Ernie was a script writer, and they put us together. We roomed together in Truckee, California, in the deep snow and the shivering cold with John Wayne and a really good cast. Just like myself, in 1953, John Wayne became acquainted with Ernie Gann for the first time. And I could tell right away that they were very compatible and became very, very fast friends. So much so that Ernie gave him first chance at the High and the Mighty. He showed him the galley proofs, and Wayne's company at that time was Wayne Fellows, making pictures for Warner Brothers, and they snapped it up.
I'm gonna take her down. Wait a few more minutes, Skip. Do as I say. But it looks like... Do as I say. Give him a few more minutes. I've already waited too long. Here we go.
He doesn't have any weak characters. He doesn't have, you know, the yes-men type of people as his heroes, you know. He always have some pretty strong characters.
We have nothing to talk over. Anyone who would sell a New York advertising agency for a broken-down mine in Canada just to make yourself feel important.
One of his shortcomings, he admitted to me, he says, I have a difficult time to write a film in which a woman would be the main character. I guess the female sex was something mystical for him.
Come and see me when you grow up, Junior.
I think he liked The High and the Mighty very much. I think that was one of, and Island in the Sky. Those kind of stories became old-fashioned. If you look at today's movies, so few of them are the big movies, the big Hollywood movies. And on those days, his films were the big Hollywood movies. He was very often on the set. He was consulted about things during the shoot, which is, you know, I know how directors are. They often don't like to have the writer on the set because, you know, if they make a change, you know, the writer can be pretty upset about any kind of a change, and you have to make changes sometimes. But Ernie was respected so much that they hired him as almost like he was a consultant, you know, to the directors who he was working with. He writes a screenplay because he wrote many of the screenplays, not just original stories. He knew about what the camera is going to do or how the camera will be handling that or how you're going to translate that script into a film. You know, his legacy is that his stories were very visual, very inspiring and dramatic, and he was writing about basically bigger-than-life characters. And I think that's important to see that, because they create a role model for other people, you know, unlike what some of the movies are doing today. He spent about 30 years of his life on San Juan Island, and he took a job at San Juan Air, which was a little commuter airline.
I asked him why he wanted to fly for us, and I knew I understood that he didn't need it financially, but he said, well, he had done all these various things and types of flying, but he had never flown commercially with little airplanes, and he wanted the experience of doing it.
He's like the gentleman farmer, but he got his hands dirty. For example, he was part of the cattle drive. You know, in those days, they allowed the cattle to be driven from one field to another field. He was always part of it. He wasn't just the guy who just looks at the cattle from his window. He's out there and helping with the branding and so on. But he wanted to be part of that, and he didn't want to just look at other people doing it. Because he loves the boats, and I had my own boats up there. We always went out fishing, and then during the the times when the fish wasn't biting, we had to talk about something. So we talked about politics, religion, but mainly about writing and what makes a good story. But he was the incredibly diligent person. I mean, he went to his chicken coop, you know, because the studio where he was writing was originally a chicken coop.
His writing routine was depending on what he was doing. Started first off in the morning, around 8 in the morning, and lunch at 12:30. And then he could play, relax on small boats or the big boats, whatever he had in the afternoon. And then he would spend his evenings out there painting.
He never stopped writing. I mean, if you look at the YouTube book, you know, he was 78 or 79 years old. That was his last book which he wrote. And all the people in the military, you know, read his books. So when it came time to do the YouTube story, you know, he had to call a couple of generals and say, I'd like to do a story on the U-2, but I can't just write about the U-2 from what I know. I got to go there. So he went to Northern California, to Biala Air Base, and he spent weeks and weeks over there. The U-2 was a spy plane, obviously, and he was the only private pilot who was allowed to fly in the U-2.
You're in this pressurized suit, the spacesuit, which is very uncomfortable. When it gets as high as it goes, it's fascinating because you're in this little cockpit. It's basically an F-104 cockpit. And when you look out, you go, my gosh, that's an awful long way down. And the Earth is round and the sky is black, and it's a fascinating experience.
And he was just so happy when he came back, and he says, guess what? I flew finally, you know, the U-2. I went up to 70,000 feet, which is an incredible accomplishment of a person of that age. But again, this is an example of, he never slowed down. You know, it wasn't that I give up flying because I'm already too old. He said, I think I had said everything what I wanted to say in my books, and now it's time for me to do something else. And you know, he kind of turned back to his paintings, and he says, this is my satisfaction now.
What means you're using to express your creativity, to say what you want to say. You can do it with a pencil, you can do it with oils, you can do it watercolors, you name it, or with stone, all of which are different techniques, but they're all saying the same thing. It says, I want to tell you a story, or it should. The written word is the same way. I want to tell you a story. And those that do not tell a story usually don't do very well.
The paintings were getting so popular that Boeing commissioned him to do almost like a calendar. They wanted him to do 12 different paintings. He didn't want to do 12 of them. I think he did about 3 of them, and it's still at the Boeing headquarters. And then he had a series of paintings on the Mutiny on the Bounty.
These 10 paintings are the result of a lifetime of fascination with the Bounty story on my part. Making these paintings was extremely difficult because portraits of Bligh are almost non-existent. And in the fashion of the time, they were done as vanity portraits. They really didn't look like the person, but complimented them greatly. I have tried to show in a portrait of Bligh the man just before the mutiny.
He had a painting exhibit at one of the galleries here in Bellevue, and lots of people ended up buying, you know, his paintings, and he got pleasure out of it. As you grow older, you may not be able to do all the things what you were able to do before, but he always found the challenge to do something which fit in within the framework of where he was in his life. On his 77th birthday, he decided, he was talking to his fellow pilot, and they were reminiscing that we've done all these things, you know, flying together and so on, but we never jumped out of an airplane. So his friend, Roy Franklin, who also lives on the island, he says, why would anybody jump out of an airplane unless it's going down? So Ernie says, well, I sure like to do it once before I die. And he was already 77 years old. And his friend was also approximately 78, 79. So They made a decision that if you jump out, I'll jump out. So that's what they did. So they went up there with Roy Franklin's son, who's also a pilot, went up there above their property, and they own like 700 acres of beautiful land over there, and they jumped out and they landed in their own backyard, basically. So that's the kind of guy he was. He just kept going and going, and at age 77, not too many of us would want to be, jumping out of the airplane.
You just cannot quit. You are, every day, you want to create something. The mere fact that this man's eyes are looking the way that they look, and he is looking the way he looks, that's a creative act. I have done that. I've played God here momentarily. And if it's right, it's tremendously satisfying. If it's wrong, you don't sleep nights. Not too long ago, I was told by some of our medical profession, quite a few of them, matter of fact, that my time on this planet was extremely limited. Well, I've been lucky. I've proven them wrong. And I intend to keep doing it. And I think part of the reason is this creative drive. Whether it's good or bad is not the point. It's there. It's like a charging engine. And it kind of falters as the day goes on until bedtime. And then I'm all kind of through. But it charges out in the morning and ready to go with more of it. Well, you never have a headwind. So that kind of says more about creativity than I really should say. I think God bless the man who knows he has said enough and cannot be persuaded to say more.
From behind the camera to front and center, John Wayne was known for his loyalty to colleagues and cohorts. Harry Carey Jr., son of the famous silent film star and character actor, appeared with Wayne in 11 different films and shares with us his memories of working alongside the Duke. Dobie, you have such a long history with John Wayne, and not only you, but your mother, your father, your wife's father. I mean, so you have about as long a history with Wayne as anybody, I would think.
Well, I loved John Wayne before I ever knew John Wayne, because my dad at that time was a character man, and wasn't the leading man. I was talking about young cowboy actors, and John Wayne and Bob Seale were my two favorites. Wow. The first time I ever did a scene with him was on Red River. Mm-hmm. And it's a scene where I played that kid that gets killed in a stampede, and there's one good scene where I'm telling him what I want to do when I get paid. I'll have more than $100, and what I'm going to do with that money, and get a place and buy my wife the red shoes, buy her a pair of red shoes. It was just when we were rehearsing it, he was fine, and finally we get to do the take, and I'm going on this spiel, and all of a sudden Mr. Hawks, Howard Hawks, the director, said, "Cut." And I went, "Oh, golly sakes, I did something wrong." Well, it wasn't me. It was Duke. And he said, "Duke, you got out of character there." He said, "You're playing a hard-nosed..." He said, "I know what I'm playing." He said, "I know," but he said, "You were looking at Dobie with a smile on your face." And he said, "That's way out of your character." And he said, "Well, I guess I was smiling because the kid's doing a good job." And that's what he was smiling at. He was happy that I was carrying it off all right. And I thought that was really great.
And then you co-starred with him in Three Godfathers.
Yes, I did.
You went from, you know, being a supporting player to being a co-star.
Well, they tried to make a star out of me, but I wasn't star. I'm a supporting actor, and I'm proud of that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not a movie star type, or a leading man type, except certain areas. You know, when I was kind of young and goofy, I had some romantic roles in some television shows, but I wasn't really a leading man, and I've always been a young character actor and then an old character actor. I went fast from young to old. But Wayne, I worked in 11 movies with Duke Wayne, and they were all, working with John Wayne were two ways of doing it. One with John Ford, there was John Wayne that worked for John Ford, and then there was John Wayne that was not a John Ford picture, and Duke was much more authoritative and took charge a lot more with other directors. But with Ford, of course, he just was one of the guys like the rest of us. But in fact, he was one of the guys like the rest of us. He was an easy guy to get along with.
When you made Island in the Sky, you were working for a pretty forceful director, though.
Yeah, William Wellman. Wellman was supposed to have this kind of bad temper and one thing and another, but he was funny, a very funny man and a wonderful director. I went in for this part, and instead of saying, you know, the usual routine about what have you been doing and what do you feel about blah, blah, Wellman said, "You want to? I can't use the language he did, but he said, you want to be in this thing?" And I thought, "Yeah." He said, "Well, hell," then he said, "You're in it," and that was it, you know. And what was funny was this, in Island in the Sky, I was Annie Devine's co-pilot. So it was Annie Devine was the pilot, I'm the co-pilot, and then at the beginning of the picture I've got a lot of dialogue, and then I don't say another word for the rest of the picture. But and the radio guy behind us was Bob Steele. So Wellman looked up and he said, "We got 3 real hillbillies in this airplane."
Real heating too.
You mean you want to reach out and around and scrape the frost off with my knife?
No, you reach out and around.
I do.
That's right, my friend.
Now, this was one of the first films also that Wayne produced.
Yeah, and it was Wayne Fellows then, it wasn't Batjack.
When he finally had Batjack Productions, at a certain point he passed the baton of producing to his son Michael.
Yeah.
And so you worked for Mike several
yes,
times.
A lot.
How was he as a producer?
I loved Michael because he was loyal. And he gave me a role which had to be approved, I'm sure, by his father, in Big Jake, a real bad heavy. And I don't think any other person in town would have cast me in that role, but he took a chance and let me get into that character and grow that big beard and with the makeup and stuff and the bad teeth and stuff and play that part, and I'll always be grateful to Michael for that role. But Wayne almost took all the air out of my chest because he said, "You look like the Cowardly Lion." He came with his big mustache and everything, and he says, "You look like the Cowardly Lion." I said, "Thanks a lot," you know. But that's the last thing in the world I wanted to hear, was that.
Tell us again about John Wayne emulating your dad.
In The Searchers, at the ending, you know, the camera's on the doorway. The girl has been saved, brought back from the Comanches, and Wayne stands to the side so that everybody can go past him. Everybody's happy, and he just sort of stands and watches them there a minute, and then he stands in the doorway with the whole desert behind him, and the whole west behind him, and he goes like this way, excuse me, and that was a gesture of my father's. A lot of times when a guy was going to stand out, he was going to shoot him down or whatever he was going to do, putting the threat to my dad, he'd go like that, and he'd do it in a conversational scene too, and it was the minute he did that, my mother started to cry. She was behind the camera, and I don't blame her. It was just a salute to my father.
You have so many great stories, and you call your book, your autobiography, Company of Heroes.
Yeah.
But I think you're a hero. You're a hero to me.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you so much,
Thanks
Leonard.
for talking to us
Such
about
a
all these
pleasure.
wonderful experiences.
Always a pleasure, Leonard. Thank you.